Hi, my name is Anat. Unfortunately, we cannot ask CP questions. I'm sure there are many. The research she is conducting and the insights she concludes from them are always fascinating, but you can contact us at the INSS or speak to CP directly, and on our website there are also findings and there's also data which will also be published in a memo that will out soon. So the data is to serve the public, and the INSS wants to have the public discourse, so we have a lot to say. We have about 50 minutes, perhaps a little less, in which to have a discussion that will deepen or delve deep into some of the issues that also came up in the previous session, with guests of the INSS who have also taken part in the attempt to try and discover the meanings of the various scenarios that we have provided to you. I would like to ask them to come up onto the stage. Mr. Yochanan Tzoref is with us, and also Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Alon Eviatar, Brigadier General in Reserves Yossi Kuperwasser, Brigadier General in Reserves Israela Oron, and Colonel in Reserves Grisha Yakubovich. Hello one and all. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for also helping us while we looked into the various issues and topics that were very complex and have been discussed here in order to map out these scenarios. With your permission, I will join you. I have my own microphone here, and because of lack of time, or for lack of time, I will have to limit you in the answers you will provide, and we all know here that there is a lot more to the sentences you will be saying and what we will be sharing with us. And in other words, this session will be moderated very strictly and perhaps not sensitively, so I'm sorry if I will have to cut you short. I will be the talking clock for this benefit. Where's Ella? I don't see her. She is hiding. Please come sit here and help me keep the times. I would like to connect to the previous session, both in terms of the structure, because I would like to begin with one identical question, as Asaf Oron did in the previous session, and I'd also like to connect to his question of where will we be in 5 years' time, but from a slightly different angle. The main atmosphere that seemed to have arisen is a status quo that is a stagnation, but territorially speaking, it's the status quo. They also talked about the disinterest or the disinclination of the states in the region. They talked about the attention that has gone elsewhere. And if we talk about leaderships, both the Israeli and the Palestinian, and we're not going to go into right now the current events and what's happening with Abu Mazen or what's happening with the Israeli government, we are in both arenas are seeing leaderships that either for lack of ability as they are perceived or for lack of will are not taking decisions that mean changing the situation, and that is a meaning that has historical implications. So what do you, each and every one of you, and please share your view, what do you think will actually rock the boat, whether it's in the internal arena, regional arena or international one? What do you think can be an event that will not allow the Palestinian-Israeli arena to continue as it has done and to gradually get to that 5-year end line that Asaf asked about? Yossi is sitting right next to me. What do you think will happen to force us to change our attention, to change our balance of considerations, and therefore our political and territorial conduct? And also if you can talk about what could cause this to change from a Palestinian angle, and that will perhaps cover up for not having a Palestinian representative here. You can speak in Arabic if you like. Okay, I think that the scenario that is forming before our eyes is one that is not any of the five that has been raised until now, and that is definitely taking the direction that you're talking about, willingly or unwillingly. The scenario that we see before us is a complete toppling, complete collapse of all the components of the Palestinian deterrence. We talked about the Palestinian weakness, but in fact all the deterrence components of the Palestinian deterrence are actually evaporating. We talk about the Arab street, but they don't care about the Palestinians. We saw that when it came to Jerusalem. Nothing happened. And if it happened, it didn't happen in Jerusalem or the Arab world, it happened elsewhere. There is the component that says, in the Palestinian deterrence, that says Jerusalem is something that cannot be touched. But Trump came and said, I have taken Jerusalem off the negotiations table. And did he? He thinks so. He said it twice, so I believe he means it. The question is, has Jerusalem been taken off the table? As he sees it, it has. He has suggested to the Palestinians that they should have Abu Dis or Ramallah as their capital. And unlike what has been said here about the Arab system has changed this agenda. The Arab system, Abu Mazen in his famous address, has warned the Arabs, do not change your priorities, remain true to, first of all, finding the Palestinian solution and only then coming with more normalization. And what did, as the Saudis say, Air India? And that is a true crisis for the Palestinians. The Saudis said, we're not going to wait forever with normalization because Israel is providing security and defense when it comes to Iran, and not you. You collaborate with them. And that is the first crack. There's always a first crack. But there is a crack in the wall now. There is now a crack in the wall, and that is why the Palestinians opposed this idea so much, because this crack will now deepen. Third of all, maybe fourth of all, I've lost count, says the speaker, don't touch Palestinian money. The Palestinian money is holy. One cannot touch it. Well, I have news for you. The American Congress has approved it on Friday, and the President has signed this that makes this 10-year force a law, meaning that the Palestinians have just lost about $1 billion shekels, $300 million. And Israel, too, is about to pass a similar law, whereby the transfers of money to the Palestinians will go down as long as they keep paying terrorists' salaries. And so the United States and Israel are both saying that this idea that unlike this point of departure where there are two situations, a Palestinian state that is collaborative with Israel, or a hostile Palestinian state, or a hostile Palestinian entity, or collaborative Palestinian entity, these are not two exhaustive options. There's also a functional option, but that comes from a different world, functional or dysfunctional. But in terms of hostile or collaborative, well, where is it going? It's going toward the Palestinians facing a reality where if all these components indeed are crushed, they have to ask ourselves where they're headed before Israel does. They have to ask ourselves where they want to be. Because the Palestinians have adhered to this narrative of a struggle, ongoing struggle against Israel while cooperating with it in order to live better. And so they are financing terrorists, and they are paying them salaries, but they're also collaborating with Israel. This is going to be a new reality because of what is happening with the United States and with Pompeo and Bolton, Yossi. So the actual scenario we should be asking about is to what extent will the Palestinians be able to adhere to their own narrative that rejects the right of Israelis to be in the state of Israel, that means that they have to constantly struggle against this Zionist entity, while also collaborating with it in order to maintain their living. Well, thank you, Yossi. I would like Israel to also look at my question, Israela to refer to my question and also to respond to Yossi in a few sentences. I will try.
First of all, I know I'm doing something undoable. I'm going to oppose what Trump said. What did he say? Oh, I will focus on a specific issue. Trump took off Jerusalem from the agenda, as far as I understood, and I want to put Jerusalem on the agenda and also to answer your question. You're asking what can be some sort of an event that can shock the system. So I want to talk about Jerusalem as a test case. Also will enable us to look at all the issues we discussed from the point of view of a microcosmos of sorts. In Jerusalem, there are 850,000 inhabitants, out of whom 320,000 or more, I don't know the numbers, it keeps changing. There is a large percentage of Palestinians, we're talking about 37%. Okay, my calculator is, but we're talking about 37% of Palestinians in Jerusalem. The Palestinians are inhabitants, residents, or citizens of this. They're not citizens, they're residents. The Palestinians can vote in municipal elections if they want to do so. Now, if this is not annexation, what's happening in East Jerusalem? It's part of the State of Israel. The Palestinians are some sort of interim agreement. They're not exactly citizens, but they're residents. So let's try to assume that the Palestinians are going to participate in the elections for the mayor of Jerusalem, and they'll be part of the city council. As far as I know, the agreement is that you have coalitions. And therefore, there's a probability that if the Palestinians will be clever enough and will agree to participate in the elections in Jerusalem, it's going to be a small revolution, because maybe the mayor of Jerusalem will not be the one you think is going to be, but will be an Arab mayor. It's not going to happen so quickly, and optimism or pessimism, we have to calm down. Maybe in order to avoid this step, the government will have to do all sorts of steps as it knows how to, in order to prevent the possibility for such a process to occur. So why am I telling you about Jerusalem as an example? Because Jerusalem is an example to a situation whereby somehow everybody accepts as a continuous situation, and that it will be so forever. So as Shlomo said in the former session, our luck is that things change, and they're not going to remain forever. This status quo you spoke about so enthusiastically is not going to remain there forever. This is one point. It's just an example to something that can move things elsewhere. Another example has to do with the siege and other things. We're talking about the poll now. This poll that you spoke about, it reflects a huge success of the settlers of the State of Israel, because they managed to convince the public in Israel with strange truths, such as, for example, that building in the settlement strengthens the security of the State of Israel. I know where they took it from, because that's what they keep hearing. But there are other truisms like that strengthen the opinion and allow the public in Israel to have the impression that we're talking about an enterprise that, meaning the settlements, that really strengthens the security of the State of Israel. And it's not true. And it's not just in, I have 1 minute, I'm sorry. Okay, I want to answer to my colleague here. There's one point that Yossi raised, and that is that one of the truisms which is no longer true, the cut of the assistance to the Palestinians by the Americans, also from UNRWA. You didn't say UNRWA, but it's part of it. Anyway, they cut the assistance to the Palestinians, and I asked myself, how exactly does that help to the security situation of the State of Israel? So I have a suspicion, quite a clear suspicion, that the more the economy of the Palestinians decreases, not only will it not help the security of Israel and to make it strong, but it will cause exactly the opposite. Thank you very much. Thank you, Israela. Yochanan, next in line. I would like to ask you to relate to my identical question, and also if you can also talk about, we spoke about economic difficulties that will be translated into political or security difficulties in the PA, and we all agree on that. And maybe you can relate also to the point that in Israel you hear a lot the statement that Israeli interest is a functioning, effective PA that has legitimacy in what's happening today. Israel, what can it, if at all, do in order to bridge the gap between the weakening of the PA because of the various reasons and preserving the interests of Israel of an effective, functioning Palestinian Authority?
First of all, I want to say that I'm the only one who's a civic servant, but I'm not going to represent Israel. I will show you that I'm analyzing things a little differently, and that's my only personal opinion, and I'm not reflecting the opinion of any other person or entity. Now, assuming what Anat has said, that Israel wants a functioning and a stable PA, that's true, and it was true throughout all the years, and it's true today. The problem is that in recent years, we are coming against issues that have to do with the lack of openness on the Israeli side in terms of the way that the Palestinian Authority is functioning, particularly because we have different expectations than we may have had in the past. And what is most prominent is, or most striking, is the way that Abu Mazen seems to be in the eyes, or seems to be perceived in the eyes of many Israeli officials and many in the Israeli public. This person, who for many years has talked in terms, by the way, he's celebrating his 83rd birthday today. This man, who for years has been using terms that no other Arab leader has ever used, and who is serving the security interest of Israel perhaps in the best way anyone has ever done, is coordinating security-wise and is being praised by the Israeli security system. This person is really being rejected by Israeli leadership and is also rejected by much of the Israeli public. We mock him, we ridicule him, we even exclude him from every possible forum, saying that he's too weak, saying that he cannot deliver, saying he's not doing enough. What kind of things can he not deliver? Security-wise, he's delivering very well. Well, the kind of things that we have asked of him, that we have not asked of anyone before him. Would Israel have wanted Abbas these days to deliver as part of the ongoing security collaboration? That's a good question. The fact that he is delivering on this front and we have had a long period of quiet here in Israel is good for Israel. But I just want to mention something that Dan Meridor has said in the past, and I don't agree with it, but when he said when we had terrorism it was easier, and we haven't had terrorism for a long time, and we're sitting on our laurels and we think that we can continue the status quo. assuming that it can last for a while. And I think that is one of the greatest risks that we are facing. I think it is one of the greatest challenges that we are not actually grappling with. What do you think could happen? That the situation that we think will not change will change, and in what direction? What is currently about to happen is Abu Mazen's departure from this world, and it is ever increasing, this chance, and I don't see any other person who is able to be as authoritative as he is, to stand at the microphones and to say we are collaborating with Israel on the security front, and to say that it is a sacred thing and it should continue. I don't see anyone else who can say that, and he is doing so, among other reasons, because he has legitimization of elections, and in 2005 he used this as a platform in elections. He said it is the end of the armed conflict. He said negotiations should be the only way to reach an agreement. He talked about a comprehensive and full collaboration with Israel, and that is something that we have not heard from anyone else in modern history. And so why did Hamas win the elections? Well, he didn't actually win the elections. They got less votes but more seats. So they do not have the support of the Palestinian public. They just have more seats in Palestinian parliament. Now, I want to say something to Cooper, if I may. Yes, but just briefly, please, because it's Alon's turn. Cooper, listen, I've heard you, and I think that if you think that Trump and the Arab world are telling us anything new or are creating a new scenario, then you are mistaken. I think the Arab leaders, with all the cracks that you've pointed to, cannot take decisions in a way that they once did. They take one step forward and then look backwards to see what's happening. We've had experience with this in the past. Trump's statement, what he said about Jerusalem when it came to the UN Security Council, all of the Arab states voted against it, even though they called on to Abu Mazen and they told him to take Abu Dis. He's not going to, and no one will let Al-Quds be given to the Israelis. It will never happen, and we should not pride ourselves in an Air India flight over Saudi Arabia. That means nothing. It will not work. And Trump, unfortunately, is doing things that I believe, I'm telling you, his last statement and his intention to move this embassy to Jerusalem, it is actually giving a detrimental blow to the two-state solution, because Abu Mazen will be losing trust in the Americans. They do not see them as mediators anymore, and they will not go into any negotiation, and he is backed up by all the Arab states in this. This sentence should be heard even in order to spur discussion and disagreement, and if the disagreement is coming to light and we've already done something, even though we know that we may not resolve it, probably not this afternoon, maybe not ever, and I've apologized in advance that I had to cut you short. Alon, the floor is yours. Hello one and all, I'd like to thank the INSS, and when I sat there, I thought the only advantage in sitting here at the table is that there will be a socket for a power for my cell phone, but there's nothing here. So I want to say a few things when it comes to the key question asked. The plans that have been suggested or proposed, and I would like to say very briefly to Kobi that, as is a tradition of the reality shows, you're the only one who's going to the next level. And I'll tell you why. First of all, allow me, Udi, to wear the Palestinian hat that you seem to lack. I'd like to speak on behalf of the bride. You've all talked as grooms, where Israel is headed, where Israel is stopping, what's good for us. I want to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. And I don't want to be pretentious, but I do want to try and speak as the mainstream of the consensus of Palestinians, and I would like to raise a few questions that are connected to one another. The first is do the Palestinians want a state? Yochanan, wait. Do the Palestinians want a state? Second question, to what extent do they want a state? How desperately do they want a state? Under what conditions? And I'll answer my own questions. It's a question that I have asked a Palestinian, or thousands of them, over the last 20 years, and I have not gotten one single answer that is unequivocal. And of course, any discussion can be expanded, but I will stop here. The second question that I want to put on the table as a Palestinian is, since the Oslo Accords and until now, have any major changes taken place in the core positions, in the core views of strategically of the Palestinians? And the answer is no. And that is a point of reference that we can relate to. We cannot play with ourselves when it comes to adjusting our plans and checking their relevance if they are not relevant or they are not appropriate with the Palestinians. Are you talking about homogenic standpoints as a structure that cannot be changed? In other words, I want you to go back to the atmosphere of my key question. Can something happen that will change something, and in what direction? My answer, and I will answer you, is that there are four key components that are part of the discussion. The first is that there are two basic concepts that this forum should have measured. And we'll now learn two very important words in Arabic: Sharia, which is legitimization, and the second is Marja'iyah, the source of authority. These two basic components, legitimization and the source of authority, are points in the light of which the Palestinians, I would say, are looking at the wind and where it should blow, where we are headed, without very concrete legitimization in Palestinian criteria and not Western ones. It is impossible for any other Palestinian leadership to leave this same course, these core positions that I've talked about. And as for the origin of authority, or the source of authority, I would like to connect that to the growing dominance or the growing prominence of the Islamic camp. It's not just a vote in the ballot. It's not just how many people took the vote. It's a part of a long, ongoing process that is taking place in the Palestinian population for the last 30 years. First of all, it's the transition on the scale from secular to religious, which is taking place not only in the Palestinian population. And the second process is the transition or the shift again on the scale from collectivism to individualism. And that undermines the question of legitimization and legitimacy and certainly the source of authority. And any plan proposed here, I as a Palestinian would say that it would need to meet several conflict criteria. They're not only territorial. Where are the big conflicts? Where are the big bones of contention? It is territorial, it is religious, it is social, it is financial, and between envy and hate you can put your finger wherever you want. And I am looking at for a plan that will meet, unlike others, these components best. And so very briefly I'd like to say that any plan that is an Israeli move, like separation, annexation, and perhaps there are some other variants as well, leaves the conflict untouched. It doesn't touch the roots of the conflict, and it takes us back to the first, to square one. And the third plan, the one-state solution, if I were a Palestinian, I would say as follows. That is the default option, not because it is a desirable option, but because that's where frustration leads us, and it's also a weapon to scare Israelis with. But it's not a real plan. It's not one that really has a say in Palestinian society. it can perhaps be accepted by the margins. So that's as for your question, Udi, where are the young people and what do they think of the one-state solution? At what situation do the Palestinians not burn down the house? That's if things continue the way they are. However, but I only have 10 minutes, so I'll have to end. This plan can continue or last if it'll be a bit more generous. And there, Israel has the ball. If Israel would, over the years, over the next few years, if it would open the belt or sort of loosen the belt a little more, notch by notch, it'll be able to continue things the way they are with a few shifts here and there. Anything else will just mean postponing the tsunami. What will happen to Israeli society in such a scenario? I will end, Anat, with your, in response to your question about a major event. I think a major event that will change things around here, which is also more realistic in terms of its creation, is Hamas taking over the territories in elections, all the territories, but in a way that is different than 2006. In 2007 there was a unity, but I'm talking about a homogeneous Hamas regime. And as for your question, Asaf, what will happen with the notes in the envelopes in 5 years' time? I think it'll be more of the same but worse. Well, on such an optimistic note, well, I didn't want to be a party pooper, but I think that at the end of the day, if I were to be sort of realistic, I think the only realistic plan, and I'm not saying it's the best plan, but it'll minimize the damages on both sides, both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and it'll be the only one that's practical, despite changes in leadership, is the current situation, continuing, but with expansion in both areas, in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in all the components, the territorial, the economic, and so on. I would like to break this anachronistic concept and to make it much more significant, but it is not one of the scenarios, one of the other scenarios mentioned, in the hope that you can control the process at every stage. At the end of the day, it's choosing between alternatives. Can you control? I'm not sure you can control less than in any other of the scenarios mentioned. Yes, you're right, we're talking theoretically, but I'd like to hear Grisha in reference to the question, and then I'll have another question personally to Grisha. Yochanan, I can see that you have a burning desire to speak, but we'll get back to you.
Grisha, please, the floor is yours. I do not represent Putin, although I'm Russian, he says. My expertise is the Palestinians. I think the existing situation is a catch-22. The Israeli wish, also when I dealt with it for many years, always we tried to find trust-building steps towards the Palestinians, and the more steps we took, it complicated us even more. Namely, if the situation changes, we are building 3 states for 3 peoples, and this is the most complicated thing. Hamas, if you know this organization, it fulfills its vision. Its vision is that, in fact, the ideology will be reflected by sovereignty on the territory. They achieved it in Gaza. That's their target, to be the legitimate representative of the Palestinians or the entity of Palestine. And therefore, the more we preserve this scenario, which is good for us, the existing situation, otherwise we create a catch-22 situation. And therefore, the situation can bring about 2 scenarios. One, and I don't underestimate those candidates that perhaps don't exist to replace Abu Mazen. It's true, we don't have a leader that Abu Mazen built, but I think there'll be a group of people, and they perhaps will lead the PA, Palestinian Authority, but the question is to what narrative they're going to be attracted to. Where will they drag the Palestinian public? So, one thing, Hamas, that created an equation. If you look at 2006 to today, after every operation, Israel changed its policy towards Gaza. So the equation is that Israel is a state of force. Their narrative is violence. Abu Mazen represents another narrative of discourse, of agreement, of negotiations, no to violence. And in fact, it's important or very essential to know what narrative those alternatives will support, the ones who will take over from Abu Mazen. And therefore, the dramatic event that can change and create that dynamics is the disappearance of Abu Mazen and who his replacement will be. Another comment to the current situation in Israeli and Palestinian eyes. How do we define the existing situation? It's called fine star occupation. If you look at it in the spectacles, that the more we're continuing with the existing situation and want to take steps to deal with the public or the population or to cause economic welfare, we're actually improving what the Palestinians define as the occupation, and I can call it star one, but there's another star as well. And therefore, I too am not a prophet. I don't see good happening in the next 5 years. I see Abu Mazen disappearing from the arena. I see an internal struggle among the Palestinians. It's going to be short because the stage after that is Hamas that legitimately is going to control the Palestinian street, and we'll find ourselves coping with a Palestinian entity, and that will change the equation. Well, I had all sorts of different questions that have to do with various sections of the scenario, but I think that what we should do is take another round. We'll start with you, Grisha. Yossi, you will be the last one. I have a feeling you will be the finalist. So, Yochanan, yes, we'll allow him to speak as well. It's okay. Okay. So, I think that in the few minutes we have left, there are not many, 5 minutes? 1 minute per person. That's going to be very difficult. More. I would really, Grisha already got us there. The elephant in the room. I said in one of the former conferences a few years ago that the elephant is so big that we don't talk about it. And I'm talking about Gaza. Although recently it's part of the agenda and a lot in the headlines, we also made a study recently here in INSS. Udi, what about him? Gaza. Where does Gaza connect to the former question? And do you think Gaza, is there anything, and that's a question that I think many Israelis are asking themselves recently, is there really something that can change the sense of threat that many feel coming from that area? And altogether, is really this issue of 3 states, is that realistic when we talk about the Palestinian politics? But please, in short. Asaf in the army used to call me Grisha Gaza 2020. Why? I wasn't in the conference, but I think it came up. In 2020, the Gaza Strip is going to go through the worst humanitarian crises ever. 2 million people are going to be left without a drop of water, no electricity, sewage. We're talking about thousands of cubes, an economic situation, etc., etc. And therefore, unless we find a solution initiated by us, coordinated with Abu Mazen, we'll find ourselves solving the problem, but getting 0 security assurances from anybody. 2, At the moment, we're talking about additional sanctions of Abu Mazen against Gaza. That's the excuse now, yes. And then the Israeli solution is to offset from the tax payment of Abu Mazen for electricity or water that he's not going to finance, and I think we're shooting ourselves in the leg. And we are undermining the security situation in the West Bank. It's better to deal with the internal problem that they have and not to intervene, but to find coordinated solutions together with Abu Mazen behind the scenes, quietly, in order to solve the problem. Otherwise, there will be no other way. 3 states for 2 peoples, and that's something we have to... Yeah, 3 states, one of them is Gaza. Yes, Gaza. Okay, short, please. There's your note. I have a threat against the others with this piece of paper. Anyway, I think that I told enough before, but nevertheless, Gaza, on the face of it, is the biggest mine. It's not soluble. You cannot solve it in any constellation in the near future. And Gaza is the mine which is trivial. It's easy to go for it, but that's not the only problem, and not the biggest problem, I don't think. I think 2 things. One, the level of friction in Judea and Samaria is going to grow between Jews and Palestinians. And if somebody thinks that there are all sorts of patents to solve this road or another road, and that's what's going to give security, I think it's a big mistake, because the demography in these 2 societies conflicts. In Gaza, there's no problem. There's one demography. And this is the problem in the West Bank. But if I look and talk about the components of the conflict, I look for a bigger problem is Jerusalem. I think that the issue of Jerusalem holds all the components of the conflict, and it's very volatile. Can I answer your question from before? What you wanted to say before? First of all, Gaza, there's your note, 1 minute. Last week, at this very hour, Abu Mazen gave a speech. I listened to his speech and I wrote the paper, and the headline I gave was a divorce paper to the Hamas. In Arabic you can't say it. It's like a threat to actually divorce the Palestinians. There's no such animal that these 2 areas are going to connect. It will never happen. It's an inseparable part of the Palestinian territory. So if you talk about the future, you have to understand that there's a huge pressure from underneath to connect these 2 areas. Only a leadership of these Ramallah and Gaza, it prevents it. This is one state and one society, one people. If you don't believe it, go listen to the speech by Ashafi in Madrid, in the Madrid conference. He spoke about the components that connect between these 2 sides. Many things that are very common between Gaza and the West Bank. I have to say, though, 10 seconds. I think that the pressure, the Palestinian pressure to connect the 2 areas is nil. Nil. Okay, but I'm telling you, it's a huge pressure. Even if it's nil, it's great. There's no such thing. I'm talking about the people, the folklore. It's strong. If Orit would be here, the one that deals with the territory, she would approve it, confirm it completely. Also, the first reconciliation agreement was done by the prisoners of both sides. You're right, but if you know the Palestinians, you know you cannot detach these 2 areas. What's happening together is an artificial isolation that Israel creates because it's convenient for it from a security point of view. That's the Israeli policy. Why Israel? Okay, forget it, not Israel. And I want to say something regarding this scenario. What's happening at the moment in the status quo, continuing the status quo, I want to say something simple. I think that if this current situation would be good for us, we wouldn't deal with it so much. We're in this current situation because we cannot get out of it. Not because it's good for us, it's just we cannot get out of it. And we're looking for 51 years how to get out of this situation. And don't tell me that this is a good situation. We cannot do things that we cannot be even the world champions in occupation. He said we are champions of occupation because the army supplied to Israel a lot of instruments in order to cope with this situation. And one day it's not going to happen. You have to take it into account to think about solutions to take us out from this reality. I'm not talking about Israeli society. What does it do? This does to the Israeli society. At the end of the day, if all the time our life and we are dealing with policing. All the time we are policing. Yochanan, this is a subject for another conference, and I think you're right, basically. But in Israel, okay, now you, Israela. First of all, I saying to Kobe with the option of the current situation from the reality show. It was yours, right? You said it's a reality show. His reality. Yeah, he offered it, but I want to tell you, Kobe, because of Gaza. Because Gaza, all the issues, this white or big elephant, whatever, causes a situation to the option of the continuance of the current situation to non-existent. Because Gaza's situation, and I know that, is very volatile. Because we heard what's happening, and because of the very close connection between Gaza, after all, they're the same people, and the West Bank, I'm afraid that there will be very serious implications on our security situation and the situation in the West Bank. And I still haven't spoke about the situation that Abu Mazen disappears and there are elections, there aren't elections. Who's going to take control of the West Bank? Unfortunately, I'm afraid from the worst. I don't see any reconciliation in the near future between Abu Mazen or his replacement. I think the only way that the Palestinians are going to want to unite the Palestinian entity, unfortunately, will not be by moderate factors, but less moderate. And what we have to ask ourselves, and I keep asking myself, but I don't have good answers, or time for the answers. What exactly does Israel have to do in order to prevent a situation whereby there will be a full control of Hamas and Islam in the West Bank? And I don't think that if it will be worse, then finally things are going to get better, although some people say it. And therefore, unfortunately, I have to say that I'm not optimistic regarding Gaza, not optimistic regarding the situation in the West Bank, even if we're going to take the steps that Alon suggests and to do the occupation to make it more, to make it nicer, more pleasant. First of all, regarding Gaza, I think we should call a spade a spade. The problem of Gaza is Hamas, not Israel. Why Israel? Hamas, it's got an order of priorities. It's so different than the Palestinian society in general. And they think that continuous struggle against Israel is very nice. It's better for them than improving life, the quality of life. For them, it's important not to live a quality of life, but to struggle. That's why the Hamas takes the cement and they use it to build tunnels rather than to build apartments. And that's why after we left those greenhouses there, they destroyed it. When we built economic centers around Gaza, they destroyed them because they don't want any cooperation. They don't want us to be here. The reason that Gaza, there's a lot of refugees, all they're interested in is to go go back to Ashkelon, to Ashdod, to Yafo, to Jaffa. That's what they want. They want to go back here to Tel Aviv. That's all they want, to come back here. And that's why they're doing this activity that we are all preparing towards, because they want 70 years of Nakba. Everything is against Israel. That's what they're bothered by. Now they're going to build tents near their fence. That's their struggle for the mere existence of our state. Why did the deportation? Oh, somebody says, how did it happen? The deportation because of the establishment of the State of Israel by Jews. And who initiated it? So if there was expulsion or deportation, let's say there was, it's still part of the existence of the State of Israel. That's what they're going to struggle for on 70 years, as opposed to what you said. They don't care 51 years. They're talking 70 years, 100 years of conflict. But that's not where the problem began. That's not where the problem began. Not 51 years ago, and not by chance. Mrs. Israeli showed us the results of the poll, and apparently 62% of the Israeli population doesn't think that it's an occupation. Because sometimes, you know, the Vox Populi is Vox Deis. But I'll tell you, occupation, the public think that your presence here is also occupation, here in Tel Aviv. So let's understand what occupation means. Even sitting here in Tel Aviv, it's occupation in the eyes of the Palestinians. And Abu Mazen himself spoke about it as occupation. So let's be accurate with the data. Because I also think that Hamas controls Gaza, and they have a certain perception. We cannot change their perception because we don't have the same instruments. We're not relevant. The ones who can do something in order to deal with it are the Arabs, and they are doing it. As far as, first of all, the Egyptians, they're really making a real effort. And what holds us is the fact that the Muslim brothers are very weak, and that's why Hamas is also weak. And now it's a new angle when Saudi Arabia, they are fighting against Qatar. They are going to promote the situation of Hamas. And you think it's linear? No, it's not linear, but that's what it can change. It can change, first of all, because of the strengthening of Iran. The Iranians are intervening in the Gaza Strip as well. They're trying to take advantage of the weakness of Hamas because they want to stable themselves there for the Hamas. And yes, they want to bring about escalation because of their own considerations.
They want to deter Israel. They want to say to Israel, look, we can hurt you from south or from the north. And so when we talk about the real decisiveness of the nuclear Iranian program, they are saying, beware, we can hurt everyone. Yossi, that's a different conference altogether. Just 3 brief comments about what's been said here. I'm going to have to shut down the microphones in a minute. Just 3 very short comments. One, time and again we keep hearing that Abu Mazen is against terrorism. That is not true. Abu Mazen does not oppose terrorism. He is currently against it because he thinks that currently we shouldn't use weapons and bombs as part of the struggle, but using knives. But they check bags. They check to children's school bags. Okay, bullet number 2. This idea whereby the continuing status quo will lead us to choose between the Jewish and the democratic state is just not true. For the last 51 years we've been here and we haven't had to choose. And why? Because at no point in time did we create an occupation in the sense that people think of. We don't intend to annex the Palestinians as citizens. On the contrary, we are giving the Palestinians the capability and capacity of controlling their own areas. That is what Oslo is all about. And number 3, quickly, get to the point. The third comment is that the analysis of the scenarios as you have presented it, even though it hasn't been presented in this way so much, but I have read your report as well, places tremendous emphasis on terrorism as a key risk. whereas in reality, terrorism is only a derivative of the Palestinian narrative, which is a combination of political and military struggle, and therefore the risk is on both fronts. And if we now reconstruct steps as have been presented here as options, even if not reasonable, such as a unilateral separation, is a mistake. It's a grave error for Israel. It will only exacerbate the current security situation. Thank you very much. Thank you, the audience. Wait, why are you thanking the audience? Wait, we have closing remarks. The last session has been wonderful. Thank you so much. That's exactly what you've had here is exactly what the image we wanted to have you see. Our main issue, our main three issues. The first issue is, and by the way, Yossi and I have had such disagreements in the army. We were together. He was the head of research and I was the head of strategic planning. And we kept asking the question, what will be the one thing, what will change things? Well, how should we think? The way the others, the way our opponent thinks, or how we think? And instead of talking about what's good for us, we keep explaining the problem with our opponent, and that's why we cannot define what's good for us. And instead of rather first defining what's good for us, what we want, and then to deal with the logic of the opponent's system as a constraint, rather than as the beginning, or as a point of departure. Because of their logic, we don't do 1, 2, or 3. The second thing, no, we're such good friends. We are real close friends. The second thing is that it's also very typical of us and of this period of time is this position, this viewpoint that is so short-term. We don't look at the long-term, and that basically is not typical of just us. It's typical of the entire world. Everyone is concerned with tomorrow morning or tonight, rather than the long-term, and therefore we are giving we're letting the big processes lead us by the nose. And maybe that's convenient. You don't need to make any decisions. We are just letting the tide take us along with it. But we saw this wonderful discussion that we just had. And by the way, you talked about 67. In 1967, the stenogrammers of the meetings after the big victories, and what did they say? They said about Sinai and about the Golan Heights, we will give land for peace. As for the West Bank, there was a very heated discussion, there was a very heated argument, and during that heated argument, Dayan came with a big solution. Let us for now apply an occupation, what do they call it? An enlightened occupation in those areas. And by the way, they asked before what the Palestinians say, and someone mentioned Orit Parlov. She showed me 2 caricatures today. We created 2 prisons. The Gaza prison is completely closed, locked on lock and key, and the prisoners in the Gaza prison would prefer to move to an Israeli prison because there the conditions are better. They also discovered that when they come with nothing, they get thrown back to Gaza. But if you come with a grenade, then you get put into an Israeli prison, so it's better. And the other prison is more modern, and that is the West Bank prison. It's an open prison. There's a bit of traffic. You can come work in Israel, then go back to prison at night. And then they decide whether they can go visit their family in Jordan, and we decide whether they can visit their family or not. Sometimes we say yes, sometimes we say no. And by the way, that's the way Palestinians see things. If we want to see things through their lenses, so to speak, through their spectacles. And so instead of wondering what they are doing, what their problems are, they have big problems. But I think we should share another experience with you. We have something that's called, and I hope I'm not hurting anyone. I don't know if anyone in the room is from overseas, and perhaps you have already passed out and you've gone. But we have a strategic dialogue which we have with the Germans. And one night during the dialogue, they've asked us a question. Maybe I've told this story already in the past, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. But they said, did you see, you saw in terms of the identification that we see ourselves as Jews above all else, above peace, above democracy, and it's ever increasing. And the Germans asked us, why is it so? And the truth is, I didn't know the answer. And there were a few people in the group who were wiser than me, and we gave all sorts of answers sort of out of off the cuff. And we said, what do you think? And they said, we're not sure you want to know the answer. And we said, we're willing to hear, maybe we won't agree with you. And they said, listen, you don't want to lose your image as the culprit, as the victim. Jew goes well with victim. Israeli does not. Israelis are strong, they are conquerors, occupiers, and Jews are victims. So you want everyone to treat you as victims because the Palestinians, they are the problem makers, they are the troublemakers, they are terrorists, they don't want you, and you're the victim. And that's what they said. And there was a real world war that night. But I keep, and I always know that the next night I will go to bed thinking about what I look like. So maybe we should think about those things as well. You're arguing with me now about what's been said to me. That's what's been said to me. Don't argue with me about what's been said to me. The main problem we have today is our short-sightedness and the lack of a leadership that is able to make decisions, that is even willing to face the problems. That's our main issue. And we are all living with this situation. We are all sort of willing to, yes, on Friday night during dinner, we maybe complain, maybe we go out and protest every so often, but pretty much we are willing to live with the situation, and as long as we do, it will continue. But we do think, and that's what's important about our work, and it's true that I was asked about bias, and of course we each have our opinions, and of course that may have an impact. So we try to create a methodology that does not impact, that does not take into account our biases. And so we took these 5 scenarios that come from outside, but we saw very clearly that we are currently in a situation whereby there is a sort of way that we may be going both ways, and we are going one way quite consistently. And that way we're not going to be able to separate ourselves from the Palestinians. We won't be able to create better opportunities for the future once we get to the realization that we need to. And that is what the long term is about. We are paying in the long term because of saying so many bad things about the other side, about the opponent. We don't see ourselves in the next 10, 15 or 30 years time, and that's the main problem. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience.